then we have to make every effort to ensure that women don't continue to be raped. This guy is one of my heroes in the Congo. He's a doctor, medical doctor, Dr. Mukwege. He treats women when they're raped. But there was a time when he couldn't take it anymore because he felt that he just became another part of the system. So they rape women, they take them to the hospital, he helps them, you know. He could have left, but he didn't leave. He stayed on to make sure that, you know, when people are afflicted by sexual violence, he would be treating them. But at some point, he couldn't take it anymore. So when he was invited to the UN to speak about what goes on in the Congo, he spoke against it. And he was so outspoken about it that when he came back, the armed groups targeted him and they were just about to kill him. Now, this story is almost like in Hollywood, where somebody who was one of the personnel in his house, when they were shooting at him, actually came and protected him from being shot at. And he took the bullet, and he survived, and the guy died. So that happens. That's not extraordinary in the Congo. You get stories like that happening every day, where people are targeted, shot at because they're speaking against what is happening. We are relatively safe here, and I hope that when I leave this theater, no one will chase me. But they are really enduring it. And because of our relative safety, it creates a duty on us to make sure that they don't go through that. And we can do that because we can exert pressure on our technology companies. Can you imagine if your university was to start asking questions whenever they're buying products from any technology company? They were to say, okay, look, our students have mobilized and have demanded from us that whenever we are going to buy electronics, we ought to check with you whether you're actually making sure that when you're manufacturing your product, you're ensuring that you're not buying your raw materials from tax. If that was to happen, and if it was to become a wave, not just for your university, but also other universities throughout the UK, then technology companies will be forced to find a way to get their raw materials safe so that people don't continue to die. Now, what have we been doing at Congo Coding? At Congo Coding, we have been mobilizing support from various sources. Student groups are very important in this particular issue simply because students tend to be the biggest consumer group in terms of technology. In order to write your essays, you have to use a computer nowadays. I remember back in the days, I could write my essay, my handwritten essay, and give it to my lecturer, and that's all right. Today, we try it. So, the student groups that are being created everywhere in the UK and across the world are going to be very important in exerting pressure on technology companies. But not only on them, but also on policymakers. Because policymakers have a role to play in this. At the moment, there is a policy championed by the OECD. Now, the OECD has suggested, and the UN has actually adopted it, it's a resolution, it's a UN resolution, that every company that deals with or buys or has products that they're selling that would use minerals from conflict-affected areas, that they should carry out a risk assessment to ensure that in their supply chains there are no conflict minerals being used. And then once you make that risk assessment, you then have to create a plan which would ensure that there is no risk for any conflict minerals to be getting into your supply chains. Now the third step is actually disclose whatever you've done to ensure that there has not been any conflict minerals in your supply chains. So that has been the policy that the OECD has championed, but the UN also has adopted it actually several times. So it then becomes an issue for policymakers to ensure that they're actually adopting this policy framework, which is very important in order to preserve lives, in order for us not to get into a situation where armed groups are continuing to get the money, buying arms and ammunition to continue the war. And if we use that pressure as consumers, but also as voters, as citizens, if we continue to use that pressure both on technology companies and policymakers, including our MPs and people like that, then we will get into a situation where the system will change. So we're using that as a leverage. Many of you are scientists here. You use a leverage to make sure that you can lift more weight than you would normally do if you're dealing with a massive problem. So we're using that as a leverage to bring about peace in the economy. So that's more or less, in a nutshell, what we're trying to do. And that's why we're holding those talks, so that people can be informed about the situation in Congo, but also feel that they have the power to exert that pressure on their universities. And if we have enough universities doing the same, then there will be pressure on technology companies, and the same would go with policymakers, because they would find that citizens are becoming more aware of the situation and are demanding change. And that will create a different kind of dynamic. That's what we want to do. Now, it will be easy for us to then say, well, Downing Street or Washington or Moscow can actually do it without us asking it. But we know that if we don't ask it, we won't get. Because at the moment, as Zibia and Iki have proved it in what they've said, there's no political appetite to actually do it. Not that many people talk about it anyway. Unless students show the kind of leadership that we need to change the situation in Congo, it won't change. Now, let me end with an interesting story, which often appeals to me because it gives me a lot of hope. You know, when you have a big problem, it's sometimes difficult to see how you can get out of that problem or how you can solve the problem. What we have now in the Congo is actually not new on the continent of Africa. And whenever there's been fundamental change in Africa, the world had to come together to actually bring about that fundamental change. I would even argue that whenever there's a big problem in the world, you need the world to come together. You need to create that togetherness, that solidarity between human beings, so that there is that connectedness between all of us to change the situation. Now, a good example for you to think about is the apartheid system. It was so difficult to change that system that when the first activists in the West started to campaign about it, people used to ask them, how can you achieve equality in South Africa? When you asking us to stop, say, buying wine from South Africa, how is that going to change the political situation in South Africa? how asking us to stop banking with certain banks going to change the situation in South Africa. How asking us to stop competing with South Africa, going to South Africa, going to stop South Africa from imposing inequality between its citizens. Those questions were asked. The reality is that when you read books written by those who were very active in that period, people like Nelson Mandela, they will tell you that their movement in terms of changing the system in South Africa had a boost when the world started to unite and speak against the apartheid system. When all those actions were taken around the world, it made a huge difference in terms of how people were treated in South Africa and ultimately led to change in South Africa. Very recently, we had a war in Sierra Leone and Liberia where similar situation occurred where you had armed groups using diamonds to actually finance their activities in Liberia and Sierra Leone. And you've heard, I think you've all heard of the Black Diamond campaign, which eventually led people to think about where their diamonds, the diamonds they were buying, were coming from. So that ultimately weakened the armed groups in Sierra Leone as well as in Liberia. Some people may even argue that it weakened as well the armed group, main armed group in Angola, because also there the issue of blood diamond was very prevalent. And so it weakened armed groups, and when intervention eventually happened, it was easier to get away, to get rid of the armed groups, illegal groups. So the same thing is happening in the Congo. So whenever we speak about it, sometimes the question is, how is that going to change ultimately the situation in the Congo? It does change the situation in the Congo because part of the problem with the Congo is that armed groups are using conflict minerals to finance their war. And if we are able to exert pressure and change the dynamic, how the minerals are being traded, then we change the equation of the Congo. And that's the appeal of the Congo Calling. That's why I'm here and why you are also here. It is to participate in that change, in that movement that actually is starting gradually to make a difference in terms of how people are thinking of buying their technology, but also ultimately of trading the minerals that we need for our technology. So that's why I came to share that